We continue King Arthur and His Knights by Elizabeth Lodor Merchant with Guinevere. Lead Ogron, the king of Cameliard, had one fair daughter, and none other child, and she was fairest of all flesh on earth, Guinevere, and in her his one delight, King Leod Ogron, as you know, was an old friend of King Uther Pendragon, who had given into his charge Merlin's wonderful round table, where seats could be found for 250 knights. This round table was kept in the banqueting hall of Leod Ogron's big stone castle in Cameliard. All the knights who feasted there were under a vow, and the words of this vow were some of the noblest words that have ever been spoken in the history of the world. Well, at least to the English mind. Besides the round table, Leod Ogron's castle held another great treasure, his only daughter, Guinevere, the most beautiful and most gracious maiden in the whole wide earth. A lot of different opinions of what makes most beautiful. Guinevere flitted about the castle almost like a fairy princess. So golden was her hair, so blue were her eyes, so peach her delicately rounded cheeks. Remember the movie Ninth Gate? Sometimes the devil appears as a blonde woman with green eyes, so this is one with blue eyes, so maybe not as bad. No. Good and bad appear in different human forms, but so peach were her delicately rounded cheeks. Sometimes she sang to herself, softly, in the great hall. Sometimes she sat in her bedroom window, doing embroidery. Sometimes she went to and fro among her maidens, overseeing them as they spun linen thread around their pretty spinning wheels, or wove the same thread into shining damask on their dainty looms. When her father's step was heard on the flags of the stone floors, Guinevere would lay over everything aside and hasten to meet him. If he were tired and battle-worn, as often indeed she found him, she would bring him cool, clear water in a silver basin, place his hands in it, and dry them herself with a fine towel before offering him a crystal goblet brimming with red wine to drink. Leod Ogron would gladly have died in the defense of his daughter Guinevere, though he was silent and almost cold to hear, and sometimes even very strict and stern. And definitely protecting one's family, even with one's life, is a very noble trait that should be more common. We'd have less serious crime if people were as protective of their families. One morning, the king of Cameliard, who had been away for some days, came galloping back to the castle on his war horse and cried to the servants to let down the portcullis, or great entrance door, to raise the bridge over the moat, and to prepare for a siege. His enemies were riding in hundreds over the surrounding hills. The knights of the Round Table came hurrying into the great hall, their pages running after them to buckle on their master's armor as fast as they could. But instead of a page, Leod Ogron was waited upon by his own daughter, the Princess Guinevere, who brought him his helmet, breastplate, sword, and shield, praying to heaven to protect him. Well, we can think of heaven as metanomial, but definitely polytheist would, whatever's up there. Or some people pray to the universe now. But why not pray to the creator of the universe? She watched the king ride out of the courtyard at the head of its noble knights. Then she herself looked after the preparations for the siege of the castle before running lightly up the winding stone stairs. She took up her stand by the window of a high tower from which she could watch the battle. What a clash of armies she saw outside! What waving of banners, galloping and rearing of horses, cries of triumph or despair! Here, there, and everywhere flashed Leodogran in his bright armor, supported always by the knights of the Round Table. For long they held their own, but by and by, Princess Guinevere, gazing always from the window, felt her heart shaken with sudden fear. She saw the knights pressed hard on every side by an enemy stronger in numbers than themselves. They fought fiercely and magnificently, but they were being driven back toward the castle walls. Would they be able to drive away these eager and terrible regiments of foes, or would they be forced to yield and give Cameliard into the hands of the enemy? Well, as long as they're defensive, but as long as there's offensive war, it's going to make its way back to whatever kingdoms. Prince Guinevere tried very hard to keep up a good heart, but when the tide of battle seemed to have turned against her father, the numbness of dismay seized her. Then suddenly she heard a shout of encouragement and triumph. Down among her father's foes came riding an unknown knight, the noblest in bearing, most beautiful in face, and brightest in armor that the princess had ever seen. Above his head floated a banner which displayed a dragon wrought in burnished gold, and in his hand flashed a sword of gleaming steel, its handle studded with diamonds, rubies, and pearls. Who was he, and whence could he have come? Guinevere leaned far out of the casement, joyful and reassured, for the tide of battle immediately turned. This is how you get shot by arrows. Or bullets in today's world. In and out, backwards and forward, glittered the golden sign of the dragon, while the strange knight's sword kept through this enemy like an avenging flame. Whoever was touched by the sword, however lightly, fell from his horse to the ground. Its owner seemed to be everywhere at once. He had slain hundreds of Leodogran's enemies, when, as if he had dropped from the sky, an old man appeared at his side, seized the bridle, and threw his warhorse back upon its haunches. And definitely, if the ancient Egyptians had, any general or any king or ruler that took part in a battle act like even thousands of his troops were, I did it alone. It's like, no, you didn't do it alone. Appeared to the side, seized the bridle, and threw the warhorse back on its haunches. Enough, cried this old man, who had come from no one knew where. Enough. Do you not see that the battle is won? The whole enemy army is in flight. Then the stranger knight paused and saw, indeed, a confused mass of men and horses riding fast for the distant hills. He bowed his head and slowly slid his sword into its sheath. Then uprode King Leodogran, grim, blood-stained, and weary, and bent low in his saddle to the young, brave stranger who had saved his castle and all that was in it. Beautiful and courageous knight, said Leodogran, how can I thank you? Come, follow me into my castle. I do not know who you are, but you have saved my home for me, and anything or everything in it is yours for the asking. The knight also bent low in his saddle, for the knights of those days were always very dignified and very courteous. Then the big portcullis was raised again, and the bridge lowered over the moat. 2 and 2, kings and knights, they all rode into the courtyard of the castle, and the clatter of the horses' feet reached the Princess Guinevere as she came hurrying down from the window of the high tower. How busy everybody in the castle was, to be sure. Pages with big baskets on their arms were strewing the floors with bright, fresh rushes, mingled with wild flowers. Cooks in the kitchen were roasting and stewing and baking with all their might. Delighted, smiling maidens were pouring cool, scented water into basins, taking clean white towels out of the presses and bringing soft, rich robes into the big hall, ready to lay on the knight's shoulders. When the pages had taken off the stained and heavy armor in which these brave gentlemen had fought, King Leodogran led the stranger knight to the seat of honor and bade him rest. As the tired soldier sank down into a couch all clean and fresh with piles of sweet-smelling rushes, he saw a lovely lady coming quickly forward from among the serving maidens who were waiting on the knights of the Round Table. To the stranger knight she seemed like a beautiful picture as she came forward, cautiously bearing a silver basin and snow-white towel, while a truant ray of sunlight lay on her golden headdress and daintily silken gown. It was the Princess Guinevere, hastening to wait courteously and lovingly on her father, the king. But as she curtsied deeply to him, he waved her from him and pointed to his guest, who was watching eagerly from his couch of green rushes. "Wait first on the stranger knight," said Leodogran. "Had it not been for his help, the castle of Cameliard would have fallen." So Guinevere turned from her father to the stranger knight, and the moment the eyes of the knight and the maiden met, the two fell in love. Well, a type of love, right? Don't make me get the guitar and cover that particular Van Halen song. So Guinevere turned from her father to the stranger knight, and the moment the eyes of the knight and the maiden met, the two... Oh, okay, I already said that part. However, how wonderful it seemed to both, the soldier in his armor looking adoringly at the sweet face under the golden headdress, the long hair, no less golden, which fell in two plaits to the very hem of this fair lady's gown. Guinevere, for her part, hardly lifted her shy blue eyes from the ground as she helped the stranger take off his breastplate, laid a rich satin cloak on his shoulders, offered him the water and the towel, and called to a servant to bring a refreshing drink. The old man, who had entered the castle with the knights, smiled as he watched them, and drawing near to Leodogran, pointed out the pretty sight. "You offered anything your castle held to your deliverer," said he. "I think I know what gift your visitor will be asking soon." King Leodogran started and looked rather dismayed. "Who is he?" he asked. "And who, old man, are you?" The king stared very closely at his unknown visitor, who only shook his head. No matter," said he. But what of your promise to give the knight anything he asks?" "My promise shall be kept," said Leodogran proudly, and the old man smiled again as he stepped away. Then everyone in the hall began to move towards the banqueting room, and the 250 knights took their places at the round table, which was spread for a feast. King Leodogran stood watching them, and the stranger knight stepped forward and joined him, looking at him very earnestly indeed. "Good and great king," said he, "I am from a distant court, and do not know your customs here. What is this round table, and who are these knights who have taken their places about it?" Leodogran answered gravely. "Brave stranger," he said, "the round table was left in my charge by a great king, Uther Pendragon himself. Whoever takes his place at it must share a noble vow. Will you sit among my 250 knights? Will you join in the words of the vow?" Now, let's, this knight did a good deed, but when one's deciding who marries who, character, as in moral character, would be a more important thing to consider now, wouldn't it? Perhaps maybe some spirit